"I just killed my husband." Those were the first words she said when she walked into the police station. No tears. No tremble in her voice. Just cold, flat words that made the officer at the front desk freeze with his pen in midair. Her hands were steady, but there was a faint smear of blood on the sleeve of her cream blouse. The officer blinked at her. "Ma'am, can you repeat that?" "I said, I killed my husband," she replied, looking him dead in the eyes. "He's in the kitchen. You'll find him on the floor." Within minutes, 3 officers followed her back to her house. The street was quiet, the kind of Sunday morning where neighbors were indoors with their families. The front door was ajar. The smell hit them first, a mix of iron and something sharp, unmistakable. They stepped into the kitchen and saw him lying there. A tall man, well-dressed even in death, with a dark patch spreading across his shirt where the knife was still lodged in his chest. The tiled floor was streaked with blood. His eyes were open, glassy, staring at the ceiling. One of the officers crouched beside the body, checked for a pulse, and shook his head. "He's gone." She didn't flinch. She didn't even look. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You are under arrest for the murder of," the officer began, but she tuned out the rest. She had already heard enough words in her life. Words of love. Words of control. Words that turned into commands. Words that became threats. As they led her out, neighbors peeked from behind their curtain, mouth falling open at the sight. The perfect couple. The ones everyone envied. How could this be? But she alone knew. She knew the truth behind the smiles, the matching outfits, the romantic photos on social media. She knew the weight of the bruises carefully hidden under long sleeves. She knew the sound of his voice when it was no longer charming but sharp enough to cut. She also knew she had not walked into that kitchen planning to kill him. But that morning, when his hands wrapped around her throat, she felt the edges of her vision go dark. Her fingers found the knife before her mind did. And then, one hard stab. Now, as the police car drove away, the house grew smaller in the distance, but the memory stayed, sharp and fresh, like the moment the blade went in. They met at a friend's wedding. She had gone alone, wearing a simple blue dress and a shy smile. He was the groomsman everyone seemed to know, tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that drew people in. When he walked up to her during the reception and said, "You're the most beautiful woman in this room," she laughed, thinking it was just a line. But he didn't let go of her hand all evening. From that day, he called every morning and every night. He sent flowers to her office, sometimes twice in 1 week. He texted her sweet messages, "I can't stop thinking about you, I'll take care of you forever." Within a month, he had met her family, charming her mother with expensive gifts and winning over her father with firm handshakes and promises. It was fast. Too fast. But everyone around her said she was lucky. Men like him don't come often, her friends told her. Don't waste time. He seemed perfect, attentive, generous, protective. When she mentioned that a male colleague had offered her a ride home, he frowned and said, "I don't like other men hanging around you." She thought it was because he cared. 3 months after they met, he proposed in a small restaurant, the ring sparkling under the dim light. She said yes without hesitation. The wedding was beyond beautiful. Matching outfits, dancing late into the night, people clapping and saying how blessed they were to find each other. She believed it. She believed every word he whispered as they danced. "You're mine now. I'll always keep you close." It wasn't until after the honeymoon that the first shift happened. One evening, as she was talking about her work, he said, "Do you really need that job? I make enough for both of us. You should stay home and relax." She laughed it off, thinking it was just a suggestion. But when she said she wanted to keep working, his smile faded. "I don't want my wife running around when she could be here with me. Quit. It's better for us." It was the first small crack, invisible to anyone else, but the start of something that would grow until it swallowed her whole. Before she met him, her job was more than just a paycheck, it was her space to breathe. She worked as an administrative officer in a small but busy firm. The office was always full of chatter, the smell of fresh coffee, and the sound of keyboards tapping. She liked the rhythm of it, the morning greetings, the lunch breaks with colleagues, the sense of being useful and independent. Her salary wasn't huge, but it was hers. She paid part of her rent, sent money to her younger sister in school, and still had enough to treat herself once in a while. She loved dressing up for work, walking into the office with her head high, feeling capable. After the wedding, she tried to keep it that way. For a few weeks, he seemed fine with it, but then little comments started. Why do you need to stay late at work? Can't someone else do it? Your boss is calling too much. Are you sure it's about work? You're always tired when you get home. What's the point of me working so hard if you still have to stress yourself? She didn't realize it at first, but he was wearing her down. Each argument ended with him sulking or giving her the silent treatment until she apologized for something she hadn't done wrong. The day she finally resigned, he hugged her and said, "Now I can take care of you properly." At first, she thought it would be nice, more time together, less stress. But soon, the walls started closing in. When she told him she wanted to visit her parents for the weekend, he said, "Your mother will put ideas in your head. You don't need that." When her best friend called to invite her out, he said, "What do you want to talk about that you can't say in front of me?" Slowly, her phone calls reduced. Her visits stopped. Friends stopped asking because the answer was always no. Even her family began to sound distant on the phone, as if they felt her pulling away. From the outside, it looked like she was just a devoted wife, spending all her time at home. Inside, it was a quiet prison with curtains drawn. And every day, she told herself she was happy. Because that's what everyone else believed. The physical abuse started small, like everything else with him. One evening, she accidentally spilled a little tea on the table while serving him. He didn't shout, just stared at the stain like it was a personal insult. "You're careless," he said quietly. "How many times have I told you to pay attention?" She apologized, wiping the table quickly, but he grabbed her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but tight enough to make her flinch. He let go just as quickly and smiled, as if nothing happened. "Be more careful next time," he said. A week later, it happened again, but worse. She had forgotten to iron one of his shirts for work. He came home in the evening, already tense, and asked for the shirt. When she told him it wasn't ready, his face darkened. "You had all day," he said, his voice low but sharp. Before she could answer, his palm landed across her cheek. The shock was louder than the pain. She stood there frozen, the heat spreading under her skin. He saw her tears and pulled her into an embrace. "I didn't mean to. You just frustrate me sometimes. But I love you, you know that, right?" She nodded. She wanted to believe it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. After that, the slaps came every few weeks, for things as small as speaking when he didn't want to listen, or forgetting to add enough salt to his food. He always apologized afterwards, always promised it wouldn't happen again. And when he wasn't angry, he could be charming, buying her gifts, taking her out, holding her hand in public. To everyone else, they were perfect. Matching clothes to church, smiling at friends' parties, posting loving photos on social media. People envied her. "Your husband adores you," they would say. She smiled and agreed. But under the long sleeves she wore in the heat, the bruises told another story. And deep inside, she was learning that in his house, love could turn to violence in seconds, and there was no one left she could tell. The years blurred together in a cycle she could almost predict. He would be sweet, then controlling, then angry, then apologetic. She learned to read his moods in the way he closed the door, the heaviness of his footsteps, the look in his eyes when she spoke. By then, she had stopped fighting back with words. Arguments only made it worse. She learned silence. She learned to move quietly around the house, to anticipate what he wanted before he asked. But no matter how careful she was, it was never enough. The violence grew sharper. What began as slaps became punches to her arm or shoulder, a shove against the wall, a grip on her neck that lingered just a little too long. Once, he broke her phone because she didn't answer his call quickly enough. Another time, he locked her in the bedroom for hours after she embarrassed him in front of a friend by speaking too much. She tried, once, to tell her older sister over the phone. But before she could say the words, he walked in, and she laughed it off as if she had only called to chat. That was the day she truly understood, there was no one left to help her. He had cut every bridge. So she endured. She wore her best smile in public, sat close to him at family gatherings, nodded along when he told stories about how well he was taking care of her. People believed it. Why wouldn't they? The photos, the matching outfits, the way he pulled her chair out in restaurants, it was all an act they had perfected together. Until that morning. It started like any other, breakfast in the kitchen, the sound of oil sizzling in the pan. She had said something about needing to replace the gas cylinder soon. He accused her of wasting money. She tried to explain, but his voice grew harder, sharper, then his hands were around her throat. She had felt his grip there before, but never like this. This time, his thumbs pressed into her windpipe, his face set in a cold, unblinking glare. Her vision began to dim. The edges of the room blurred. Somewhere behind her, her hand touched the knife. And in that moment, survival was the only thought she had left. The kitchen was warm from the gas flame, the smell of fried eggs still hanging in the air. Morning light spilled in through the small window, touching the edge of the counter where the knife block sat. She stood with her back to it, his hands locked around her throat. At first, her body reacted before her mind did, the desperate gulp for air, the clawing at his wrists. His grip only tightened. His face was close, his jaw clenched, his teeth gritted like she was the enemy. Her vision began to narrow. The sizzling pan sounded far away, like it belonged in another world. Her chest burned, her lungs screaming for air. She could feel her pulse hammering in her ears. She tried to speak, to say stop, but only a choked gasp came out. His thumbs pressed harder. She felt her legs weaken, her knees threatening to give way. And then her fingers brushed against the cool handle of a knife on the counter behind her. It wasn't a decision she thought through. There was no time for thinking. Her hand closed around the handle, her arm moved, and the blade slid forward with a sudden, terrible force. The sound was a dull, thick thud, not sharp like in the movies. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. His grip loosened instantly. She stumbled back, gasping for breath, watching him stagger 2 steps before collapsing onto the tiled floor. The knife was still in his chest, the dark red already spreading across his shirt. The only sound in the kitchen was her breathing, heavy, uneven, almost foreign to her own ears. She waited for the shock, the panic, the tears. They didn't come. Instead, there was only a quiet, hollow calm. She took one last look at him, lying motionless on the floor. Then she walked to the bedroom, picked up her bag, slipped on her slippers, and stepped outside. The sun was already bright, the street still calm. Neighbors greeted her as she passed, and she nodded back, her face unreadable. 10 minutes later, she was standing at the front desk of the police station, telling the officer, "I just killed my husband." The officer at the desk didn't move at first, as if he wasn't sure he had heard her right. She repeated the words slowly. "I killed my husband. He's at home. In the kitchen." Something shifted in his eyes. He picked up the phone, speaking in quick, clipped sentences to someone on the other end. Within minutes, 2 uniformed officers came through the door, their boots heavy on the tiled floor. "Where is the house?" one asked. She told them, her voice steady, like she was giving directions to a stranger. No trembling hands, no tears, no begging. They led her outside to a police van. She climbed in without resistance, sitting on the hard bench at the back as the engine rumbled to life. The drive was short, the streets half empty, sunlight bouncing off shop windows. She stared straight ahead, ignoring the curious stares from people as the van passed. When they reached her street, a few neighbors stepped out of their gates to see what was happening. Some whispered. Others just watched. The officers followed her inside. The front door was still open, just as she had left it. She stood back as they entered the kitchen, the taller officer crouched beside the body. His hand went to the man's neck, searching for a pulse. He looked up and shook his head. Dead. The other officer bent down to study the scene, the knife still lodged in the chest, the blood pooling across the tiles, the chair knocked over in the struggle. He didn't ask her any questions. One of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The cold metal snapped around her wrists. "You are under arrest for the murder of," he began, saying her husband's full name. He read her the rest of her rights while she kept her eyes on the wall. As they walked her back to the van, a neighbor gasped loudly. Someone else muttered, but they were so happy. She didn't look at any of them. Back at the station, they took her statement. She told them everything in a flat voice, not about the years of control, not about the bruises, just the facts of that morning. When she was done, they put her in a holding cell, the metal door clanged shut behind her, and for the first time in years, the silence around her felt different. It felt empty. The holding cell smelled of damp concrete and sweat. The walls were stained, the iron bars cold to the touch. A single dim bulb flickered overhead, buzzing faintly like an insect trapped in the ceiling. She sat on the wooden bench, her back against the wall, her wrists still sore from the cuffs. Across from her, another woman lay curled in the corner, snoring softly. The silence between the flickers of the bulb was heavy. She didn't cry. She just stared at the floor, tracing the cracks in the concrete with her eyes. Her mind wandered, not to the kitchen or the knife, but to the images people carried of her life. She could almost hear the voices, women at church saying, "Your husband treats you so well. You're blessed." Neighbors smiling, "We need to find husbands like yours." She remembered the way they used to step out together for events, her in a flowing dress, him in a crisp suit, matching colors. His arm around her waist, his smile wide for the cameras. The flash of phones, the claps, the compliments. Even her social media had played the part. Anniversary posts with long captions, photos of surprise dinners, staged moments of him handing her flowers. The likes and comments always came. Couple goals. May God bless your marriage. No one saw what happened when the doors closed. No one saw her sitting on the bathroom floor, pressing a towel to a fresh bruise. No one heard the sharpness in his voice when he called her useless because dinner wasn't ready. No one watched her delete her friends' numbers because he told her they were a bad influence. The image of perfection had been so carefully built, and she had played along, smiling for the pictures, nodding when people said she was lucky, telling herself it was easier to keep the mask on than to explain the truth. Now, in the small, cold cell, there was no mask left. For the first time, she didn't have to smile for anyone. But the weight of what she had done sat beside her, heavy and unshakable. Morning came slowly. The light from the barred window painted a pale square on the floor. She had not slept, her eyes burned, but her body felt too heavy to rest. A loud clang echoed as the cell door opened. "Get up," an officer said. She stood, her bare feet against the cold concrete, and followed him down a short hallway to an office. The air smelled of paper and ink. A man in plain clothes sat behind the desk, shuffling through a file. He glanced at her once, then began to read in a steady voice, "You are hereby charged with the murder of," he said her husband's full name. The words were final, heavy, like a door slamming shut. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, as if the decision had been hers all along. Outside the office, the station was busier than yesterday. Uniformed men moved in and out, voices overlapping, telephones ringing. But she could still hear the whispers, "That's the woman who killed her husband. She doesn't even look sorry." 2 officers walked her out to the waiting van. The metal cuffs closed around her wrists again, tighter this time. She didn't resist. Through the small, square holes in the van's window, she saw a few familiar faces, neighbors who once envied her life. Some looked shocked. Others looked curious. None of them knew the truth, and she knew they never would, not the whole truth anyway. The van moved, taking her away from the life she had lived for years. Away from the house where every wall held a memory she didn't want. Away from the man who had promised to love her, then tried to take her life. In the distance, the courthouse loomed. She straightened her back and took a slow breath. There would be no going back. This was her life now, not as the wife in the perfect marriage, but as the woman who ended it with a knife. And for the first time, she didn't feel the need to explain.